Ms. Abylkassymova. Good morning, dear participants in the Congress. Today, our event is happening in the year at a time when we celebrate the National Currency Day, and our president, our first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, played a very important role in this area. Under his guidance, our country adopted very robust reforms of the financial market, and Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, our current president, has tasked the task of further developing the financial sector, and the finance sector has become the most advanced sector in our economy. Of course, the development of our economy, of our financial sector, also has benefited a lot from financial institutions. The strengthening of Kazakhstan's economy will be greatly influenced by the financial market. The world has been facing crisis caused by the pandemic. The 2020 crisis has become a very serious challenge for our country. To mitigate the risks for our country, the regulator's first objective was to ensure the stability of financial organizations. In this respect, starting March 2020, they adopted measures of regulating. In the conditions of reduced economic activity, we needed to provide accessibility of loans. A national program increased the loans for targeted support of businesses. At the instruction of the president, the rate was used for them was 6%. Subsidies were received by over 4,000 businesses, and banks restructured loans for borrowers. As a result, the loans grew by 2.7% at the end of 2020. In April 2021, we had growth of lending. The financial sector of Kazakhstan quickly adapted to new challenges in the global economy. The growth of capitalization and the reserve of liquidity allowed preventing spread of crisis to the financial sector. The crisis allowed us to finish the sanation of the financial sector. We have moved to remote financial services. We improved platform solutions. We also strengthened green financing. Thus, we can state that the current 2021 became a pivot year in the development of the financial sector. Financial market has been transforming given the current challenges. The further development of the financial market will be determined by the following areas. First, the provision of competitiveness in the banking sector. In 2021, we completed sanation of banks. In the last year, 5 banks left the market. And in the last 3 years, we had 8 banks leaving the market. And non-working loans or distressed loans in the amount of 6.6 trillion Tenge were written down. The NPL, with the delay of 90 days, has been in the lowest amounts, even though the non-working assets were written off from banks. The assets have grown by 40% still. The AQR confirmed the availability of capital at systemic and individual level, and banks added 128 billion tenge. As a result, the sufficiency is 25% now, which is 3 times more than the minimum requirements. But the most important result of AQR is the transformation of banks in risk management. We have implemented 6% of all measures that were planned to prevent the growth of new risks in the banking sector. From 2019, we moved to risk-oriented supervision. The key element of risk-oriented supervision is the SREP model, which assesses corporate management. Starting 2021, regulator started publishing priorities for 2021. In 2021, the SREP process, starting from this year, included integration of new instruments. First, it is the regular AQR. The second new element of the supervisory system is the supervisor stress testing, which looks at crisis situations. For the first time, the agency, together with the National Bank, developed concept of supervisory test system stress testing. And pilot stress testing was performed in several banks. And further on, this will become part of the supervisory process. Also, starting 2023, another important task is to involve distressed assets into the economic turnover. To reduce distressed assets, we made an agreement with 18 banks to reduce stressed assets from over 2 million to 0.8 trillion, and the banks are going before the schedule in reducing their distressed assets. We are creating conditions for a liquidity market for distressed assets. We have a draft legislation developed by the Ministry of Finance, which will allow enlarging the participation of private investors. Service Companies Institute will also be introduced, which will manage problem assets. The draft legislation will be proposed to the Parliament in this year. The previous speaker has already said that major banks are developing their own ecosystems. They increase financial inclusion, but this also creates new risks. This is related to restricting competition to other markets, security challenges. Therefore, we will develop methodology on protecting the customer. The second important area is risk protection. The insurance sector has been showing high financial sustainability. Assets have grown 64% in the last 3 years, now totaling over 1 trillion tenge. From the start of this year, the premium growth is 37%. The growth of the insurance sector was fostered by digitization. Investment opportunities have also been improved. In the saving insurance, we have had tax preferences on long-term insurance products. And we also introduced deferred pension annuity. As a result, the voluntary insurance has risen to 43%. The next priority objective is to transfer the process of payment receiving into the electronic format. For this purpose, we have to ensure transparency of this whole process. We will create new products on insurance. If we talk about mandatory insurance, we plan to introduce flexible rating, take into account regional specifics. In the last 5 years, the capitalization of this stock market has reached 37 trillion Tenge as a result of upgrade of the infrastructure in the MSCI and FTSE. Kazakhstan has met main criteria for emerging markets MSCI, and the main trend for the stock market was the growth of activity of retail investors. In 2020, we introduced remote identification of clients. As a result, the number of physical persons has grown significantly. Banks have also gained the right to provide full brokerage services to all clients. With the growth of retail investors, we have faced the need to protect the investor rights. We will determine liability for investment recommendations, and we also will implement other measures. In 2020, we lifted restrictions on exchange access. As a result, the growth of investments was 627 billion. So we also simplified the permitting procedures. We introduced new types of bonds. We created new regulations for new bonds, for green bonds. Apart from creating market for green finance, the agency, together with the National Bank, will introduce ESG in financial organizations activities. In addition to what has been said by previous speaker, ESG will be implemented in a staged manner. We are going to introduce SREP and to provide stress testing. The fourth important area is to improve the potential of the microfinance market. At the instruction of the President, we included all microfinancing organizations into our supervision. We also started to provide licensing to microfinance organizations, and a total of 1,061 licenses have been issued to date. We also determined the top premiums and the top rates. We also are implementing measures to prevent fraud. Our agency's future work will be focused on expanding the potential of MFIs in lending to SMEs. We need cheap lending. For this purpose, we are looking at creating apex organization that will attract funding and to decrease regulatory pressures. We will differentiate the requirements for different MFIs. For major MFIs, they will have the opportunity to transform into banks.
And I'd like to spend more time on this issue. The president, in his video message, said that the role of the financial sector is to build the well-being of the population of Kazakhstan. We're seeing that against the background of the increased demand starting from the second half of this year. There's a large growth in loans for the population. It has grown from 13 to 27%, and mortgages also from the beginning of the year have grown by 20.6% against the background of new mortgage programs. In spite of that, there has been a decrease of rates for mortgages. The growth of prices on the real estate market may reduce the affordability of housing, and such growths of funding are risks for financial stability, and they can lead to a risk of a loan burden. And to reduce the risk, we want to use macroprudential policy instruments, depending on their degree of influence on the debt burden of the population. And in 2021, to reduce the loan burden, we took a series of measures. Firstly, we've implemented a 50% coefficient of loan burden, and it stipulates that the overall payments should not exceed 50% of a person's income. There was a ban on giving a loan to those who are below the line of poverty. And also, for further control of the loan burden on the population, we plan to implement a requirement on banks and MFIs reporting on all people with a loan. And if there is a difficulty in repayment, there is a procedure in regulating overdue loans. There is a pre-court regulation order that has been put in place, and now banks and MFIs have to notify the person of the delay, have to assess their solvency, and offer restructurization. And in May, a mechanism of rehabilitation was implemented, and this has helped rehabilitate the status of borrowers. And within this law, in order to protect from collectors, there were also measures taken. So video and audio recording is now mandatory. Currently, we've developed additional suggestions and proposals on regulating collectors' activity. This stipulates for the increase of their working capital, their charter capital, and to introduce criminal liability for illegal actions of debt collectors. And by the decree of the president, the government, together with the National Bank and the agency, have developed regulatory amendments to improve the administrative procedure. And the protection of the rights of financial services consumers is the priority of the regulator for the coming time. Dear Congress participants, the financial sector should support the well-being of our population and the growth of our economy. And I'd like to thank all the participants of the market for the construction dialogue and coordinated work in this spirit, and I'd like to wish everybody success in building a competitive and successful market of financial services in Kazakhstan. Thank you very much.